Hi, and welcome to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm Dupe Witherick, alcohol free wellbeing and transformational coach, and the best selling author of A Cocktail of Clarity, How to Ditch Drinking, Embody a Joyful New Identity, and Thrive Alcohol Free. This podcast will show you that being alcohol-free is not what the traditional narrative says. And even though alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it is okay to give yourself permission to stop drinking if you want to. And you do not have to wait until you hit rock bottom. It is certainly not boring, and I believe ditching drinking is just the start to living an extraordinary life. By getting rid of this one thing, it allows the doors to open to endless possibilities and opportunities. Each week, we will have guests on who are at various stages of the alcohol-free journey, from those who are curious to those who have been alcohol-free for years. We will also have experts on talking about different topics relating to alcohol and beyond. Through these conversations, you will discover what it means to thrive alcohol-free. Enjoy. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. It is dry January and we are on day 11. So if you are doing dry January and you've got to day 11, that is fabulous. Well done, you. You should be feeling really proud of yourself. It's amazing to have got to double digits, and I'm rooting for you. You can keep going, you can do this, but maybe take a pause and think about how you're feeling, and also think about the fact that you have done 11 days without alcohol. You've gone through at least one weekend. If you only drink on weekends without alcohol, you've gone through however many days that you would normally drink. And so, yeah, you should really be feeling chuffed, and that it's a huge achievement. So day 11, keep going. You are a third of the way through. So I'm rooting for you. Earlier this week, one of my articles that I'd written came out. I wrote an article for Alcohol Change UK, who are the founders of Dry January, and my article was featured in the Dry January blog. So if that's something that you're interested in reading, then feel free to go and have a listen. It's really talking about why you're not missing out by taking part in Dry January. So hopefully that will inspire you as well. I think I've mentioned on the podcast my 21-day challenge. So the 21-day challenge is a combination where you get to experience both one-to-one and group coaching. And it's really to give you an initial break where you don't drink for 21 days, but it will also help you get a really clear understanding on the impact of alcohol and what it's doing on your day-to-day life and how you can break that cycle. We'll talk about how to beat those cravings when it comes to wine o'clock and how to navigate those alcohol-free firsts. And there will also be some practical tools to help you really enjoy taking a break from alcohol. And you'll have time to really think about and explore whether being alcohol-free is something you want to do longer term. So if you're doing dry January and you're day 11, but you'd like to go a bit further, then feel free to join the 21-day challenge. If you have been umming and ahhing and thinking about it, then maybe the 21-day challenge is a way to take that initial break in a non-judgmental, safe environment with like-minded people. And so the group coaching starts on Tuesday, the 16th of January. So if there's still time to join. If you would like to join the 21-day challenge, then I'd love to have you on. Okay, so my guest today is Amanda Thomson, and she's the CEO and founder of Noughty. And if you have been in the alcohol-free space or you know any alcohol-free drinks, you may have heard of Noughty. They do sparkling wine as well as red, white, and rosé wine. And for me, Noughty was a game changer. It was the first alcohol-free drink that I tried during my 21-day break. And at the time, 3 and a bit years ago, there were hardly any options. And so to discover Noughty was what basically kept me going for more than 21 days, because I thought if you can find a drink that is delicious and healthy, and you feel that you're still celebrating and doing whatever you would normally do with alcohol with your friends and feeling like you're drinking a normal drink. It just helped change my mindset. And I thought, well, if I can drink something that is delicious and I can wake up the next day feeling fab and I can get on and do stuff with my life and be a lot more present and everything else, why not try doing this for a bit longer? So the 21 days then led to 30 days, 60 days, etc. And alcohol-free drinks were the game changer for me. It was all about keeping the rituals but changing the ingredient, and that's been a real key thing. So I'm delighted to have Amanda on the show. Before we go into the conversation, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about Amanda and the fact that she really foresaw a huge shift in the drinking culture away from the reliance on alcohol and decided to create this world's first premium non-alcoholic portfolio of wines to be the alcohol-free alternative to champagne and fine wines. So she describes Noughty as her game changer brand. And I've obviously mentioned it already. That's how I describe it. It is a game changer. And it's becoming a worldwide hit. It's a premium alcohol-free, sparkling and still wines that taste delicious and avoid unnecessary sugars and additives. And Noughty's also doing good by putting ethical purpose alongside profit, as they're also a B Corp certified company. Amanda was voted one of the world's top 100 coolest people in food and drink in 2019 by Business Insider magazine. She's a Department of Trade export champion and an EY winning woman. And she won the prestigious Le Cordon Bleu Entrepreneur of the Year award in 2017 and is the only non-American on the board of the Adult Non-Alcoholic Beverage Association. Amanda forged her early career as an arts broadcaster on national TV and radio, and she wasn't a stranger to her favourite glass, which was champagne, and delicious food served by chefs and restaurant owners in London looking to get some exposure. She was raised on plant-based, no-sugar diet by her health-conscious mother, and so she's always had a keen interest in what's in her food. This led her to leave her career in entertainment behind and up sticks to Paris, where she studied wine at the Cordon Bleu School. And that is what led her to start her groundbreaking business and where Noughty was born. As I said, I'm delighted to have her on. We have a really fabulous conversation. It's really interesting and hopefully gives you food for thought. So without further ado, here is the conversation with Amanda. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
So Noughty is a brand that I am sure a lot of people have heard of if they have started dabbling in this alcohol-free space and for any amount of time. I love the phrase, keep the ritual, change the ingredient, and having a drink that feels like you're drinking an adult drink really helps in the alcohol-free space. So love Noughty, and I've already said that to you. I think it's amazing. But I would love for you to tell us your backstory and how you got to the point where you created Noughty, because I know you were doing a mix of alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks originally. So I'd love to hear that story.
Champagne was always my buzz, really, not going right back, actually, obviously not to childhood. As a journalist, as a broadcaster, I really fell in love with champagne. I was in the arts space, and it was for me a sort of obvious celebratory moment, but there was just something very special about that one first glass of chilled bubbles. And I'd romanticized working with champagne originally, and that was the beginning of the story of Noughty, ironically, was wine and alcohol based. I moved to France and I retrained in wine. So it was my second career, really, because I'd had one career which I'd loved as a broadcaster. And then I threw myself into wine studies and actually launched a champagne and a beautiful upmarket organic Prosecco and a sparkling wine brand before I transitioned to making my first bottle of Noughty. So I guess that love of fine wine and specifically champagne is highly pertinent to the history and the story and the creation of Noughty. My first bottle was a sparkling Chardonnay, like my favorite champagnes are Blanc de Blanc, which is 100% Chardonnay, essentially, white of white grapes. And so it was really born out of a love of those things, but a recognition that there wasn't anything really for me around the wine table when I wasn't drinking. And that was really, I guess, you know, we all like to remind ourselves of the light bulb moment. And that was really it for me. Was there was nothing for a wine lover like me to drink when I wasn't drinking. And I was kind of baffled that that could even be true, because of course the beer market had moved on so drastically. If you look across the past decade and look back to perhaps the legacy brands like Caliber or the really early alcohol-free beers, I've never been a beer drinker, but my beer-loving friends say that, you know, they started out really basic. And of course, now I gather there's a lot of good ones for those who like beer. So I kind of really was shocked to learn that besides the legacy wine brands that didn't really exist in the wine sphere, and what I mean by that is discerning wine drinkers would have had no relationship with them. So there wasn't really anything really in the alcohol-free space that served that wine purpose. And that was that light bulb moment that originally got me into that kind of obsessional world of research and development. And I've got to say, it was actually a lot less fun than when I first developed my original champagne, because there are so many great champagne makers in the world. And actually, there weren't really many great non-alcoholic winemakers, and therein sort of lay the irony, I suppose. And so that was really how the journey started.
Amazing. And so you're absolutely right. I would say that Noughty was probably one of the first real...
I think we were actually the first.
Yeah.
I mean, quite unbelievably, because I mean, I was invited in America to be on the Non-Alcoholic Beverage Association founded board as the wine expert, and it was just me, really. Wow. I'm usually the only person around those tables. It's growing now, but actually, until just really this past year or so, there was really only me basically pushing that quality thing, which is kind of crazy and quite exciting.
That is amazing. Yeah. So how did that feel then, if you were the only one on that board really pushing the agenda? I mean, you see the change in the market since.
Sure. I'm quite comfortable being the only one, and that sounds a bit odd. I think being a journalist, you're always, I've learned now, once a journalist, always a journalist, you're always in the future in your mind. And what I mean by that is, I don't know if anyone out there has read the book Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point. I mean, there is in life cycle of trends and buzz and the way the world goes, whether it's fashion, food, music, whatever, politics, even, you know, there are these ebbs and flows and trends. And I think that you're naturally very future facing as a journalist often. And I was even too early. I did a organic rosé sparkling wine in can actually really early, and looking back to my childhood, my mother was way too early before the tipping point. She was never a journalist, but she was a health food fiend when I was growing up in the 70s, and I always think it's really fascinating. I think in a different life I'd be a trend forecaster. I find that really fascinating, just looking at where the world is going on a macro level. So going back to your question, the singular element of being the first, rather than being scary, was actually hugely exciting for me, because once I kind of was convinced myself that I could be the first one in the world to change this, it actually became hugely exciting. And I was no stranger to controversy, because I'd shaken up the wine world already and asked difficult questions about sugar in wine and all kinds of things, transparency of labeling. So I think you're never afraid to be an agitator. You're used to poking the bear and getting to the truth. And I guess the overused word in the modern world is authenticity, but you're really always searching for that if you're a good journalist and you're not looking for what is it, somebody else's version of the truth, or whatever that kind of post-truth thing is. But in its literal old-fashioned terms, whatever the nub of things are, the truth of it is. And so I guess I wasn't afraid. I was actually hugely blown away and excited about being the first.
Yeah. And to the point of you always looking in the future, did you predict, for example, that they're saying now that by 2025, the market for non-alcoholic drinks is going to be $1.6 trillion, which when you first created Noughty a few years ago, could you imagine that?
I probably could. I mean, obviously, I couldn't imagine what the number would be or what it would look like, but I could imagine a world where Noughty was a mainstay of the wine industry. And I think I always sort of say that as a founder, you're usually good at a couple of things, or, you know, and the best founders, I think we're very honest about what we're bad at. And I always want brilliant people around me who fill in all my gaps where I'm average or bad at things. And my two things really I worked out pretty early when I was studying wine were palate. I've got a really good palate. I'd make a shocking sommelier because I can never remember all the facts and figures in the wine world and the appellations. It's a bit like learning tort and law. My friends who are masters of wine, I mean, they literally have to bury their head in books, and I would never remember anything. I find that hugely impressive. But I've got a very good palate, so I'm a good taster. So I'm good at that piece, and I'm good at vision. So I'm always like macro, where am I going? What's happening? And then it's almost like, how do you build out the steps to get there? I'm quite impatient for the getting there. And of course, that sort of founder, we're not very good about celebrating the moments on the way. So like at the beginning, before we recorded this podcast, you were really kind about Noughty, and you said a few lovely things. And I was like, oh, that's so kind. But I realized, you know, most entrepreneurs who are really growing something big, and we're so focused and we don't really take long to go, that's crazy. I've just come onto this podcast and you've just told me you love my brand. And that's kind of a moment, but we don't really take long to appreciate those moments, because in our mind, we're always so focused on the next big thing, as it were. And so I think I guess I've learned about myself on this journey, because as an entrepreneur, you learn a lot about yourself, whether you like it or not. I've learned that that's how I operate.
And have you started celebrating a bit more then, or
no, we're
really?
so bad at that. We're really bad. I'm always putting that on my to-do list. I try and really big up the team with all their great wins, but no, we're not very good at being proud of ourselves. I always find that. I don't know if it's being British, actually. I mean, it's quite an awkward space being proud for us Brits. I do find America quite freeing. Yeah. I'm just back from California, and what I love specifically about America, there's a few things actually, but what I do love as an entrepreneur is that we do lose all that kind of, oh, I'm just doing this really small thing. You know, we're so good at playing everything small and down. And I'm not convinced that helps, particularly women and diverse founders, because the more our Britishness plays into, oh, we're just doing our little podcast, just doing my little drinks business, you know, just you know, nothing special. It really does not help with the amplification. And so I think that is a bit of a complicated space that perhaps we don't explore enough of, because we're always trying to pick up female founders, diverse founders, then the needle doesn't move, blah, blah, blah. But I think that really is part of the issue, is our unique Britishness, which stops us ever blowing our own trumpets. And actually, at this Californian business conference I was at with EY, which there was a whole contingent of incredible female founders from all over the world. And we did a fascinating exercise that I would encourage anybody to do in business, which would be like you and I having a chat. And then when we go around the room and get up and talk, I'm selling you and your business, and you're selling me and mine. And it's really fascinating what comes out, and how much of an incredible job I did selling this female founder's business that to this day blows me away, that I would make a movie out of, you know, and actually she felt the same way about me, but I would have never really seen it that way. And I think it's quite an interesting way to frame things, actually. And I think we probably all need to talk a bit more about that and what that does to hold us back.
It's a really good point. It's always easier to sell other people's things than it is to sell your own, isn't it? So yeah, really interesting comment. And I wonder how we do change that. And you know, maybe you know, like alcohol being so ingrained in our society, maybe being very reserved and not wanting to blow our trumpet is another thing that's ingrained in our society that we maybe need to change as well. So yeah, we need to potentially think about how best to do that. So okay, a couple of things. So how was that trip to America? Because obviously in the UK, I think Noughty is becoming well known. It's in a lot of the supermarkets. It's in Soho House and various hotels and other things. How's it doing in America?
Yeah, it's our biggest market now, actually. They're very open. I find actually it's a really interesting market for my brand. Yeah, it's going really well there, and I think it's a huge opportunity for us. Yeah, it's quite exciting, actually. The energy and the optimism there, I find very exciting and quite uplifting, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, we'll watch that space. And so Noughty amazed me because obviously it is really low sugar. A lot of these alcohol-free drinks have so much sugar, and that was one of the things I loved about it. You know, really low sugar. It's obviously vegan, it's halal certified, it's organic, it's everything really. It's like the healthy version. And you talked earlier about labels and having more transparency and obviously the sugar element. And a lot of people that stop drinking suddenly get that sugar head on them, and it's quite a tough thing to get through. What inspired you to create all of that and make sure it ticked all of those boxes?
Well, interestingly, I didn't set out to tick all the boxes. I set out to do what I did when I had a champagne, which was create the best liquid possible in the purest way. Really, that was what I set out to do. And you've touched on a really interesting point that I think is going to blow up as time goes on in the alcohol-free space, which is just the sugar thing is just really becoming the elephant in the room. And I think that to replace alcohol with sugar, I mean, you could argue they're equally as bad in different ways. And I think that this is a huge issue that people aren't talking about enough. I'm never really anywhere publicly to try to be negative, and I never want to be, criticizing anybody's brands. But I think founders should be really, really looking at this and to cut alcohol and then chuck in sugar, chemicals, sweeteners, all manner of other ick things, I don't believe is the way forward in any shape or form. And I think eventually, probably sooner rather than later, depending on each country's legislation, labeling is becoming a lot more transparent, which I'm actually delighted about. And I think anyone who isn't hiding anything in their drinks will be delighted about, but sadly lots of brands won't. I think that will really start to put the spotlight much more firmly on that issue. But I think that cutting alcohol and then choosing your drinks that are just like soft drinks in that sugar, chemical, calorie space is really going down the complete wrong avenue. And so, yeah, I'd be pretty worried if I was a producer of a drink that was ticking all of those wrong boxes. I don't think that's where we need to go in the modern world. And I think, unfortunately, they will come unstuck.
And labelling is a really interesting thing, because I have to say, prior to stopping drinking 3 years ago, I wasn't really conscious of the fact that wine bottles didn't have any labels on them. There was nothing other than the alcoholic volume. That was it. It wasn't really, they didn't say how much sugar or anything. And that was just something that was never questioned. So it was so refreshing to see alcohol-free bottles come out with the label of exactly what's in it. And I think the sugar piece is really important, because I know that if I see the sugar content is high, I don't touch those alcohol-free drinks. And so it makes a huge difference. But why do you think it's been the case for so many years that people just haven't had to put those labels onto alcohol?
Well, I think wine's such an interesting, complex thing. And of course, at its high level, I believe it's art. I still have utmost respect for the incredible winemakers in the world who are making beautiful liquid. And then at the opposing level, it's cheap, it's full of chemicals, it's full of sugar, the price is driven down, and everything's going to the bottle and making of it, and nothing's going to the actual liquid, or marketing, and nothing's going to the liquid. So you've got such a broad church, and it's hard to compare Arthur and Martha. But I think the irony is that at the highest level, the best Burgundies are made in a biodynamic way, but we've just never really celebrated that. And you've got such complicated history with wine. that each country is quite steeped in its own history, and then add modern legislation that is countrywide, and sometimes even in the US statewide, if we take the US as an example, you've just got a myriad of complicated issues all coming together. And I think for a number of reasons, the wine industry specifically has fought against having to be too literal on labels. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. But I think whether we like it or not, it's coming across the drinks industry. So it's almost like, you know, I was the first person, I think, who ever started talking about, you know, how we should know what was in our wine bottle, certainly on the UK side, and pushing transparency of labeling. And I remember I was seen as quite controversial, which was kind of surprising, I think. But it's almost like we can debate it to the cows come home. I was doing a non-alcoholic discussion about a new report that was coming out, you know, saying, what would we like to call low? What words would we like to use? What would we like to have in our bottle? You know, and it's kind of the same point here. It's almost like I'm always happy to discuss it. Ultimately, it's going to be out of our hands. So this is coming. We will all be honest eventually, probably sooner rather than later, about what's in our bottle. That will be a legal requirement soon. So I think we all just have to, you know, face up to that and deal with it. You know, I mean, it's a complicated discussion, isn't it? Many producers of many things don't really want to celebrate certain ingredients that they're putting in. And also, to be fair, in the wine industry, there are a few ingredients, like, for example, sulfites get a terrible name and everybody goes, oh my God, has it got sulfites in? In fact, almost all wine has some degree of sulfite, like almost all food. So it has some degree of preservative. It's actually levels that you need to really be focused on. But, you know, I think in the modern world, we want to reduce everything to a clean soundbite: good, bad, black, white. You know, we don't want grey, do we? And of course, everything's nuanced, or not everything, but a lot of things. And that's where I think it becomes a lot more complicated.
Yeah. And, you know, what do you think will happen in that sense if labeling does become,
well, it's not if, it's when
it does become sort of, you need to be transparent? I imagine a lot of companies will potentially suffer under that, or
well, I think they should suffer. I think if they're putting really bad things in their bottles, we shouldn't be consuming them. It's like processed food, right? I mean, you know, it's the same. Why should we hide behind smoke and mirrors? If I'm putting crappy ingredients in my bottle to make it cheaper, then I'm technically poisoning people slowly, in that it's really bad for them. It's like processed food. We have to just stop hiding. And then if consumers obviously are wanting to still consume them, that's an informed choice with a clear ingredient. We all do things in life that are bad for us, but we need to be doing it knowing it's bad for us, not being in that grey area, which is, I think, where that truth and transparency comes in, right?
Yeah, amazing. So a lot of your wine is de-alcoholized. So
actually, all of our wine,
all of it is
we make wine that's de-alcoholized.
So for people that might not be aware of what that really means, could you sort of explain what de-alcoholized means?
Absolutely. And for the sake of not talking about it for the remainder of the podcast and beyond, I'll keep it snappy, but I can encourage anyone who wants to know more to check out our website, because we've got the Smithsonian in America wrote a whole article if anyone wants to get into the science. Basically, we're making a really good wine to start with, a conventional good wine to start with. Then we de-alcoholize it using a process of what they call vacuum distillation. You're basically removing the alcohol. We're doing it at a low temperature because we want to retain the vinous qualities. And then we're doing it to the point where in our sparklings, there's 0.0 alcohol left. And in our stills, there's trace alcohol left, which is basically under 0.5%. Which in the UK, there's a government debate going on at the moment. Most countries are agreeing that 0.5% is where we should agree that non-alcoholic stops and starts. Basically, bread, vinegar, soft drinks, all kombucha, all manner of things have what they call trace alcohol, and it's not on the label. So this is part of all the label debate at the moment. But the reason that our sparkling Chardonnay and rosé are just slightly different, is they are relevant for anyone who follows a halal diet, whereas our stills aren't. So that's the point of difference, really.
Okay, excellent. And so you started with the sparkling Chardonnay, and it's grown since then, which has been fantastic, because as I've gone on my alcohol-free journey, which is, as I said, just over 3 years now, I've gone along with Noughty, and I've loved it because you've brought out different things along the way. Can you maybe talk a bit more about how you got from the sparkling to where you are now?
Yeah, so that was the first baby, I guess, going back to my point of my favorite champagne. So I wanted to create something that could stand alongside my favorite champagne. And the key was really, I was never setting out to replicate. I was setting out to create an inclusive experience that gave you equal enjoyment, albeit with a different taste, because there's no alcohol. And I think what I always said as a brand owner from the start was, you know, with our red wine, for example, one has to psychologically let burn go. Some of my sort of mixology friends, they'll be making amazing cocktails with chilies and all kinds of things. And that's an incredible thing to do. But we are a wine brand. And I think the reason we are having such success, well, there's a number of reasons. But one of the reasons, I think, from the get-go was a bit like a non-alcoholic beer. There's beer, there's non-alcoholic beer, there's wine, traditional wine, and there's us. And I think there's no real further explanation needed about our brand, which makes life easier than, I guess, if you've got one of those fascinating but complex, slightly aligned drinks, like whether it be like a tea or a kombucha or whatever else it might be. So I think we are a wine brand that happens to be non-alcoholic, and that's kind of what we've always said. And we, again, a bit like a kind of post no low world, we're already focusing ourselves on fitting into the wine industry, because for me the vision was always bigger. And what I mean by that was, I am delighted that people who don't drink and are really in that kind of club and space have fallen in love with and continue to fall in love with Noughty. For me, the really exciting visionary opportunity is actually bigger, which is to say that anytime anybody chooses a bottle of Noughty over a traditional bottle of wine, you're actually making a health choice without realizing it. And for me, that's when you're actually living the dream. And that's when you can actually start to change the world on a much deeper level, actually. And that's really when it starts to become, I think, even more exciting. So we're already working on establishing ourselves in the traditional wine industry, but we happen to not have alcohol. And I think that's a really exciting point. And it's incredible that no-low is being talked about so much. And I guess being at the vanguard of that, it's, when I say my job's done there, I don't mean done like I'm not interested in it anymore. But what I mean is I feel like that's just got a life of its own. Now I'm interested in shifting the wine world. So I guess it goes back to that bit of always looking ahead to something even bigger.
Yeah.
Oh, and I didn't really answer your question. Classic journalist. You asked me about the portfolio.
Yes.
Yeah. So sorry, I've just taken myself back there. I'd be a good politician, wouldn't I? So that wasn't supposed to be a diversionary tactic. We've got the sparkling Chardonnay, which was the classic alongside traditional champagne. Then a lot of rosé champagne drinkers were like, well, what about rosé? I was like, yeah, what about rosé? So we then worked on a 100% Tempranillo, which is the alternative to rosé champagne. And then the stills came after that, and they were a different challenge. But we've got a whole portfolio now. So Noughty Rouge, Noughty Blanc, and a Provence-style rosé. And right now in this season, the red is really killing it. And I think, you know, it's a bit cooler in the UK and a lot of the US at the moment, albeit not in California, but certainly East Coast. And so I think Noughty Rouge, you know, just that curling up by the fire with a glass of red wine that happens to be non-alcoholic, you know, is pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you've got all of them now. So there is that real alternative. And interesting, your comment about being established in the traditional wine industry without alcohol is fascinating. So what does good look like then in that sense for you? What's your vision when it comes
Well, I really love it when you can go into anywhere that is, you know, really focused on traditional wine, and Noughty is integrated into that list. Because that for me means that if you and I are out for drinks together and other friends who are drinking traditional wine, you know, they might have traditional wine. I might start with a traditional glass of something. If there was a fine wine glass I liked on that menu, then I would transition to Noughty. You may stay on Noughty all night. For me, that becomes a really exciting blended opportunity. And it also then starts to encourage, if you look at how the plant-based movement was a decade ago, slightly more, that then starts to become really interesting, because that's how you shift mainstream culture, by integrating into it. And therefore, of course, you're going to hopefully, as long as you're still in love with Noughty, going to choose Noughty. I'm going to choose it because I love it anyway. But then, oh, what are you having? Oh, what are you two having? Oh, well, actually, I'm getting up early. Oh, yeah, well, actually, I might just have Noughty. You can really start to see an exciting shift. That's what it would and should look like for me, ultimately.
And that's the inclusive experience that you were describing earlier. Yeah,
rather than we're getting there now, and it's great we're getting there. But I've lived through plant-based because I've been vegetarian all my life. Long story. And the other menu, because you're not drinking. Oh, we've got a no-low menu somewhere. You know, yes, everywhere's starting to do that, and great they are. But let's just really start to shift into the mainstream, I think, rather than being other. And actually, when we get into our consumer demographics, the data piece for our brand is fascinating, because I'm delighted that people like you have been our mainstay forever. And actually now most of our clients drink. They're using Noughty for balance. That starts to show me that we are shifting a group of global wine drinkers. The data is showing me that that's happening. And that's when it starts to get really exciting. And you know, whether it's in a nice high-end retailer and somebody's going to buy their traditional wine in America for Thanksgiving, holiday season, you know, UK for Christmas, New Year, and they're getting their wine, and they're like, I might not, I'm going to be a bit tired, I might not drink the whole time. Oh, and my great aunt doesn't drink, and so-and-so's pregnant. Oh, I'll also grab Noughty. And then a bit like it used to be in the plant-based world, where, oh, that actually looks like quite a nice vegetarian dish. Can I have a try? You know, and then you start to break down all manner of barriers. And so I would encourage everybody who is jumping up and down in the no-low space right now to say, don't be too fixated on staying in your club. It's a bit like this idea of how we shift business culture. How do we shift women in business? Do we just keep talking in a vacuum with just women, or do we bring male leaders to the table? I think anyone talking about no-low, we shouldn't really just be fixated on those of us who don't drink. If we want to shift culture quicker, then let's get out into the mainstream. And so I think that's when the magic can start to really happen. And that's why I'm really fixated on that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's fascinating because a lot of my friends have tried Noughty, and a lot of them now drink Noughty, even though they still drink alcohol, because they love the fact that they can have something in the week that keeps them, you know, on fire.
And then, as you say, you know, we all know how we can change habits. So you can start by going, oh, I'm just going to have Noughty in the week. Oh, actually, it's Friday. Naughty's quite good. I'm getting up early to do a spin class. Oh, maybe I'll just have Noughty tonight. That's how you actually shift habits.
Absolutely.
And that's why occasionally, it doesn't mostly happen, but occasionally when people in our space become a little fixated on just those who don't drink, I think it's really missing a trick, actually. I really do. And I also think that it's very easy in a vacuum, if you just, whatever it might be, it's like, how do you shift a political opinion? If we're only ever going to talk to those who share homogenous political opinions, how would we ever move people's thought process? Exactly the same with no-low. If we only just talk to those of us who love no-low, we're not going to change the world, right? Exactly. We'll end up staying in our little club. You've got to break down actually the bigger walls.
And it's just shifting people's perspective, isn't it? Because, and I think with something like Noughty, you're absolutely doing it, because you're saying to people, you're not giving anything up, you're actually gaining.
Absolutely.
As you said, from a well-being perspective, having that healthier choice of drink, especially with all the goodness in it as well, you are gaining. You're not giving it up.
Exactly.
And so,
Although we never really focus on those things. What I love most about my brand, I think, probably is we aren't at all sanctimonious. We're not selling ourselves as healthy, clean, blah, blah. You know, there's that whole movement of drinks, and good luck to them. I think that this is a much more interesting opportunity, which is we're an incredibly elegant, delicious wine brand that happens to be non-alcoholic. That's it. And then, you know, then without selling yourself as like goody two shoes brand, that's how you can start to really make a difference. And of course, Noughty's now got a life of its own, which is actually quite specific. And I'm delighted to say it's like, you know, I guess having a child that you then have to let go, it's really got its own personality now, that, and it's standing on its own 2 feet as a brand. And I think it's very clear what it stands for. And that idea that it's actually fun and delicious, and it happens to be non-alcoholic, you know, that's pretty exciting for me.
Absolutely. And actually, now you said, I was thinking about what attracted me to it was the fact it just looked like a bottle of champagne I'd go and get.
Right.
And I was a big champagne drinker before.
Right.
I was generally drink champagne, but towards the end, not drinking champagne and gin and tonics were probably my go-to. That was all I would drink. And so it was quite important, probably subconsciously, for me to see a bottle like Noughty, and it didn't look like the other alcohol-free things that there weren't as many around at the time, of course, but it didn't look like any of it. It looked like a proper bottle. And to your point,
glad you say
look at
that.
the other bottles as well, the reds and the rouge and the blanc. They're proper bottles of wine.
And really
that actually makes a huge difference.
Thank you. That's what I set out to achieve. So it's lovely to hear you say that. And just that idea of it sitting comfortably on the table. And I just got so bored of people saying to me that they were so fed up being judged, or I'm just like, God, it's just like the most boring thing. If you want to talk about it, brilliant, but there's lots of other things I'd be fascinated to learn about you, right? And it's like, why should you always just have to keep telling that story? I guess it's a bit like growing up being plant-based. I just got to the point where I was like, do you know what, I don't care, just, you know, I'll eat whatever, but let's talk about something else, because you do not want the fact that you're not drinking to be the most interesting thing about you. I mean, geez, if it is, then everybody's doomed, right? So if you reduce it to that concept, it's just absurd. And so I think we've got lots of stories about people in high-end hospitality, and they'll walk around with a flute of Noughty. I heard that from someone at Soho House the other day, and everyone thinks they're drinking. Great, whatever. No one's going to kind of make a big deal about it. And I think going back to that inclusive piece and bringing Noughty to the dinner table, you know, it's not alcoholic. Oh, okay, right. You know, great, let's try it. Oh, it's delicious. Or, you know, we've also converted a lot of people, interestingly, who thought it was alcohol. Obviously, you can only do it that way round. You can only do this, obviously, with people who already drink. We've ended up inadvertently, without realizing, people will go, oh, yeah, my friend poured me a glass, and I didn't even realize it was non-alcoholic. I mean, that for me, then that's the start of something quite special, you know, if you can actually convert people that way.
Yeah, definitely. One question that a lot of people maybe will be thinking, and of course, I think the brand is amazing, but a lot of people think because it's alcohol free, it shouldn't be as expensive as the alcoholic version. And so what's your take on that?
Alcohol is ethanol. Sadly, we see people drunk on the street, don't we? So alcohol as an ingredient, ethanol, scientifically, I mean, I think it's pennies or less, or I mean, it's literally, you can even make it, I think, very easily for free. It's the least expensive ingredient out there. That's why, sadly, it's very easy for poor people to be alcoholics the same way as it is wealthy people, right? I mean, obviously, it depends what you're getting drunk on, right? If you're not, you have to get drunk on Krug. So actually, that's the truthful answer. Obviously, then if you get into making Noughty, for example, I can't speak for every other non-alcoholic brand, but we're making a good wine to start with. Then we're de-alcoholizing it, which is a whole secondary process. So we've got 2 processes. So I think once you kind of explain it like that, I think it's much simpler. Just that idea that how do we see, sadly, poor people being drunk.
Yeah.
I mean, that ingredient is not expensive.
It's true. And, you know, fundamentally, it's what we clean our houses with and what we fill our cars up with. But it's just an interesting concept, because I get asked that, you see. People say,
Well, that's
why is
the
it?
truthful answer.
Yeah.
And I think once you explain it like that, people are, oh, yeah, okay, I get that now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I don't want to get too controversial here with how the space is going to develop, and I'm in my wine lane. But I think for people who are producing highly expensive drinks that could be in that crossover soft drink lane, I think that could end up being problematic price-wise, because I think, where does a soft drink end, and some of those alternative drinks that are classing themselves as non-alcoholic beverages, to use the American term, where does that end? So I think that there will probably be a bit of a shakedown there as well.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that's why it's such an interesting space, and you can absolutely taste the difference, shall we say, with some wines versus others. And for a long time, I think it has been, people have tried to do alcohol-free red wines, and a lot of people, I remember 3 years ago, I just couldn't
you were early,
couldn't find anything, and I'd tried things and I just be like, oh, this just isn't good, or it'd be too sweet, or there'd be something. And the alcohol-free red wine has always been a bit of a challenge. But since Rouge came out, it's interesting, it seems that others have followed suit.
Yeah, I'm pleased that people are pushing quality. I met a couple of founders the other day in the UK market, and we're not often in the room together. This was when I was speaking at the launch of a new No Low report. And I'm really pleased and relieved, frankly, that others are trying to push quality, because I was really out on my own. And yeah, I think that's only a good thing.
Yeah, brilliant. And so the other thing that I'd love to get your perspective on is, I think absolutely pubs, restaurants are getting better, as you say. They might have another menu, or they may still make mocktails or whatever, but a lot of them actually have some good options. But the conference space still seems to be a bit far behind in terms of...
It's really hard to permeate. I mean, I can tell you, and it's like a lot of things in the industry. I won't blow it apart publicly until I've probably on the other side of this journey, but I don't know. I find it borderline possibly corrupt. I don't know what's going on there. It's really hard to get to the decision makers. I think big alc and big industry has controlled the pipeline for a long time. I mean, I've got close to a few really interesting people, so we'll see if it leverages. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's certainly in the UK. I mean, I'll be honest with you again, going back to America, I think where I've been in the room in America, actually through one of my producers, has actually been easier. And what they do have in America, a big corporate industry, which I love, is they actually are excited about diverse founders. They said, oh, you're a woman, it's your business, yes. Oh, and you know, is your heritage not white English? No, I'm half Asian, great. You know, I mean, these are questions that no one in the UK has ever, frankly, cared about. I mean, I'm not saying people don't celebrate female founders, but just in a literal pipeline of corporates bringing you to the table, I think we could learn a lot. So I think the UK is actually behind America. I'm not saying it's happening already in America, but we're all working on it from different angles. I would say I'm probably closer to cracking some degree of that in America than I am in the UK. And so anyone who listens to this podcast who knows any of those big gatekeepers should really send them my way, because it's, that's a very tricky one. So I think, putting my journalistic hat on, it's to do with lockout deals and money, probably.
Really interesting, because I've attended many conferences, and it is still red wine, white wine, or warm orange juice, maybe
maybe
flower.
you and I, because we're both obviously quite vocal in this space, maybe you and I should start some sort of LinkedIn campaign. Maybe we should. I mean, I'm always up for a bit of agitating. I'm always open to try to get to who the gatekeepers are. And if you think you would have expected me to have cracked that by now, and if I'm telling you in November 2023 that I still haven't managed to crack that in the UK, then I guess I'm quite tenacious. I guess you get a sense of how tough it is.
Interesting. Well, let's see what we can do. Let's continue to change the world. And the other place that I've found fascinated over the years, I travel a fair bit, or at least used to, for business, and airports, and actually finding alcohol-free drinks in duty-free and in business lounges and on the flights.
So duty free is another financial thing. Really, I think it's quite hard to get listed in. I mean, the drinks industry is really controlled by money. Big old-fashioned money deals that big boys have cut back in the day. I mean, it's still very much a big boys old-fashioned industry. I cannot stress that enough. I've been surprised at the higher levels, actually, as someone who's a woman and who's got a B Corp business. So a lot of it will come down to those boring historical reasons. Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, we do our best. We're listed in the first class BA lounge at T5. Obviously, I can't fly through there as an entrepreneur, and I'm assuming you can't yet. So we're in a few places linked to airlines. But yeah, the trend has really accelerated so rapidly, but also I think we have to be aware, you and I, we are also in a bit of a vacuum where we know that we're all talking about it. We know the press is talking about it. We know investors are interested in the space and trying to get leverage, but it is still fairly future facing. And actually, let's be really honest. And this is where I think a lot of entrepreneurs who are looking to come into the space are quite surprised when I tell them this. The actually volume opportunity at the moment is quite small, and it's quite a crowded market already. So I always say, unless you've got something really special you're doing, I wouldn't pile into this market now. And what I mean by that is it's overcrowded for the volume opportunity. So, a lot of these things I think we're frustrated about because the change isn't happening fast enough, but actually the change is happening. It's just that because we think the trend is much more established because we're talking in our vacuum, our time frame is different. So I think there's an element of that, which I think is important to remember here. And also in hospitality's defense, I keep doing these parentheses, that's an industry that's been hit hard every which way all around the world. But let's talk about UK, US, but particularly UK, after COVID and particularly in the UK with staffing after Brexit, all manner of issues. And so, it's really up to us as thought leaders in the industry, whether it be pushing conferences to come to the table through their producers, whether it be encouraging hospitality and airports, and we've really got to make that noise. It's up to us to shift this, I guess, through constant reminding people that we are here. It does matter. People will buy. It's always that sort of tightrope, isn't it, between being too activist and complaining, which I never really try to do. I'm married to a publicist, so he's very good at reminding me to stay on that side of the fence as an ex-journalist, but also just sort of really recognizing that we are the thought leaders. It's kind of our job, really, to shift this in the right way. So I guess there's all of those kind of things that I put in the mixer when I'm oscillating between frustration and then also recognizing that the shift is happening, and it's kind of my job to help it shift.
Yeah, amazing. So where do you see Noughty in 5 years, Amanda?
Well, I really think we'll be a household name by then. I mean, I always wanted people to ask for Noughty by name, one word. I wanted it to have its own personality. I wanted it to grow up from me. I'm starting to see that it really is growing up from me in that regard. It's hard to build a household name. I hadn't really realized consumer brands are really, 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 really tough to build. So I've just got to keep my head down, keep focused. And I like to hope in 5 years we'll be definitely much closer to that goal.
Amazing. Well, thank you for everything you do in the space. I think it's
right back at you. You too. I'm just, you were one of my early cheerleaders. I mean, you were my original tribe.
Thank you. Okay, so I ask everyone this: what does thriving alcohol-free mean to you?
I guess, I mean, and just to clarify, I never want smoke and mirrors, so I still enjoy the odd drink. But for me, what it means to me is energy. I find my energy is entirely different when I wake up in the morning, when I've had Noughty the night before. Entirely different, entirely positive, entirely clear, much more optimistic. So it means energy for me. And for me, good energy is what we all need more of in the world to make it go round, as well as building my brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you. Anything else, any final words that you want to leave the listener
Well, I
with?
was just going to just remind everybody that we have a big online presence, and we'd love you all to be part of our community. So it's just Noughty AF on Instagram, and that's naughty with an O, as in 0%. So Noughty AF is Instagram, and then our website's naughtyaf.com. That's NOUGHTY. Naughtyaf.com, and we're really responsive as a team. If you click an email on there to the website, that'll get to me and the team. You can talk to us anytime. We love to hear from you, and just really delighted for you all to join our community.
Brilliant. I will add those to the show notes, and thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And
really appreciate you inviting me. Thank you so much. It was a really interesting interview. It was nice today. It was different conversation, which I really enjoyed.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, thank you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks again. Take care.
Well, thank you, Amanda. It was so lovely to speak to Amanda, and I do hope you enjoyed that conversation. And I loved when she talked about it really being an inclusive experience that gave you equal enjoyment. And just by creating something like Noughty, it has given people options and choice. And it's not necessarily that you completely ditch drinking as well. It could be that you decide to drink that on days that you don't want to drink alcohol. So I know a lot of people who have discovered Noughty and they'll drink that in the week, but then on the weekends they may still have alcohol. So it just gives people options. And I also really loved, the fact that we talked about labeling and sugar and what really is in our bottles of alcohol, and the fact that we don't know and we never really looked at it before. It wasn't something you pick up a bottle of wine, you wouldn't be looking at the ingredients. And so it's interesting that that's likely to change in the near future. So I do hope you found that conversation interesting, and I would love to hear your thoughts. So feel free to reach out via Instagram or send me an email. As I mentioned, there's the 21-day challenge coming up. If you'd like to join us, I'd love to meet you. And it's going to be a great 21 days. And hopefully you will see alcohol in a very different light and just enjoy not drinking and not feel like you're depriving yourself. And so feel free to sign up to that. Again, I'll put all the details in the show notes. But other than that, best of luck with the next week. The next time we'll speak, it will be 18 days, and so you will have gotten through 18 days of dry January if you are doing dry January. So keep going, and I'd love to hear how you're getting on as well. And if you have any questions, then feel free to reach out. Okay, have a wonderful week, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you so much for listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe so you get alerted every time I drop a new episode. I'd love it if you could rate, review, and share this episode. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free and follow me for daily tips. If you would like to work with me, I offer one-to-one coaching sessions and have my signature Thrive Alcohol Free Society group coaching program. If you're not yet ready for coaching, I also have a self-paced online course, which is a companion to my book, A Cocktail of Clarity. All the links are in the show notes. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful week. Take care.